welcome back. And one more thing, remember where we are. First, you learned about an overall kind of methodology to kind of talk about your brain. The second, we did a much more deep dive around anxiety. And then the last segments you've been watching are all the tools we might want kids to have in their toolbox to help them approach what's making them anxious rather than avoid. But I want to remind you, anxiety doesn't really go away till we get to the doing part. And so that's what we want to talk to you about, because the doing is so important. I want to get you to kind of think back to what we started with, but the notion of skiing or swimming or any skill. That if you were on the mountain for one day and doing bunny runs, is not going to make you feel like an expert skier and that you can handle anything on the mountain. And so the first thing we want to do is to make sure they have the skills. And once they do, then the real work of anxiety begins, which is using the rewards, the motivation, but having them start to approach. So the fancy term for this in the literature is called exposure work, which basically means we move away from talking about the mountain to getting on the mountain. And so we want to give you some tips and tricks and tools to do so. So the first thing we want to do to talk about is when you start getting to do, the research has shown there's no benefit from jumping right into, let's say if you were skiing in the same way, if your child was on a bunny run, there's no good benefit to jumping to double blacks and pushing them way out of their comfort zone. We want to start with always pushing, but to target something that pushes them into the 5 to 7 range. Remember on that scaling. We also want to continue to make them do over and over. It's not a one-shot deal till it starts to feel easy or bored, just like skiing. Remember, you won't move to green runs after the first time they do a bunny run well. You want to see them do multiple trials till the bunny runs really get boring and it's time to bump up the level. And what we also know about anxiety, remember, is that it can get locked into one idea or place. So the more we can increase the variation. So let's say it's giving speeches. Maybe instead of just at your house, maybe that's the classroom, Starbucks, wherever it might be, the more we practice, the more we feel masterful. In the same way, if I only ski on the same mountain, am I really going to feel like I can tackle any mountain in Colorado? The last thing we want to talk about when we're kind of doing the doing work is before you engage. You don't want to just throw your kids on the mountain and say good luck. Ideally, you're talking to them before, you're preparing them, and you've negotiated what is the challenge we're going to do before we do it. So those are kind of some of the tips before we get in. Start early, talk to them and engage with them and come up with an agreement. What's the challenge going to be? I'm going to go on the target for 5 minutes and I have to buy this thing and come out. And then what's the reward for doing so? Because remember, what's the motivation to help them? How many points will it be? Will it be whatever they get for free because you're buying it for them? Whatever that is, so that's negotiated ahead of time. So that's the first thing to kind of be aware of when we're doing challenges. Here are some other tips. So one of the things that's going to be provided with you is a script of how to coach someone through and questions to ask. And what I want you to do is not deviate, not come up with your own, but stick to the script, because that's how they're used to learning. In the same way, we might want our kid to learn how to ride a certain way, and once they get more comfortable with that riding, they might change it up a little bit and find their own groove. The next thing to kind of be aware of, remember, they are battling their anxiety when they're doing this. They're touching the cobra, even if you don't see it's a cobra. So if you really notice them getting way too anxious or can't handle it, slow down and go back to the calming tools. Make sure their smart brain is present. Calm them down. And then once they're calm, move forward again. And maybe they did agree to a challenge and thought they could do it. Their smart brain was on board, but it wound up being harder when they were in the moment. So the key is, again, with any challenge, is making sure they do something around what's making them anxious and they don't get to avoid. Because remember, if they do avoid fully, anxiety has now learned another trick to get them to avoid. We can't just let our kids avoid once we get to the doing phase. Another good tip is, as you get used to the doing, to move at their pace. If your child or teen or student wants to move quicker through a challenge and answer the questions more quickly, that's great. If they're just ready to do, that's fine. The key is the doing. Another thing is, especially with teens, they might not want parent involvement. And that's really okay, I say, as long as there's evidence that it was completed or done, or that the child or teen is challenging their anxiety. You don't have to be involved. And we've also included a self-guided sheet where they can do it and kind of show you by walking the steps that it's done. That you want to be very positive and affirming. This is hard stuff. You want to celebrate it. You want to help them see the victory. You really want to be encouraging in this process because it's so hard. The next skill that's going to be hard as you start doing this on your own is, how do I negotiate the challenges? When you kind of know what the challenges are, what they're anxious about, you need to do some negotiation. So some of the language that can be helpful is, what are you willing to do today? Are we up for doing the next step on our challenge ladder or hierarchy, which we're going to talk about? Those are all languages you can use. One of the things that in the challenge phase that can be hard as a teacher, educator, or parent, you can do a lot of suggesting that your teen or child might say no to. So if that gets the case where you feel like you're doing a lot more work than them, I might encourage you to introduce what I call a counter proposal. So a counter proposal, what I say to kids or teens, I can offer 2 suggestions around, let's say, public speaking. I'm going to give you 2 ideas that might challenge your anxiety about public speaking. You can say no to them, but if you say no, by the 3rd one, you have to give me a counter proposal, or what are you willing to do today? What could you do? As opposed to just continuing to throw it out there. And you can't allow them that we talked about, but remember, once you've negotiated, you always want to be in the mindset, we gotta cross the line. We can't let anxiety win anymore. It might not be a full victory, but we gotta do something around what we're anxious about.